Welcome everyone to the Raised Crossing Design course. So my name's Ken Beer. I'll introduce myself in a second, and I'll also introduce Jonathan Gordon, who's going to lead us through the technical components of this course. And we have Marissa here as well. Hello, Marissa.
Jonathan, hello everyone. Welcome to Raised Crossing Design Training.
Thank you. And what's your role, Marissa?
I am training coordinator here at Safe System Solutions. I have been working very much behind the scenes with Jonathan and Ken to help bring this course to life and getting everyone enrolled and ready to join the course today. So if anybody has any administrative or logistic questions, please let me know. You're welcome to chat to me using the chat function, and we'll explain all the functions in a moment. Or you're welcome to email me. I'm sure you've already received a whole bunch of emails from me already. So please shout out if you need me during the course. I'll be just here behind the scenes.
Okay, thank you. Let's jump to the next slide. So my name's Ken Beer. I'm the Principal Engineer at Safe System Solutions. And for those who have viewed the recording of the Raised Crossing Principles course or came along to the Raised Crossing Principles course, you would have seen me present on some of the details of Raised Crossing design. But we had requests for more detail and further information about the civil design. And this sparked me into thinking I better get Jonathan Gordon involved in this, and I'll introduce him in a second. But my contact details are there. I'm going to be behind the scenes as well, but I'll be on the chat and answering some questions, feeding questions to Jonathan. So I'll be the sort of moderator of the session. Jump on to the next slide there, Jonathan, and tell us, who are you, Jonathan?
Well, hi everyone. A real pleasure to be here today, and I'm looking forward to sharing my knowledge on race safety platforms with you all. So I'm Jonathan Gordon. I'm the director of my own company, JTG Road Engineering. I've been a road design engineer, and that's sort of my passion. That's my nerdy passion. That's my expertise. And I've been a road design engineer for around 15 years now. I grew off the back of being a construction engineer prior to that, and really trying to understand, sure, what a design is and how they work, but also not really understanding if I was constructing a good design or a reasonably poor quality design, or if there are improvements available. So working into the understanding design, I then thought I'd turn back to construction engineering one day better for it, but I never have. I've just been a nerdy engineering designer ever since. And yeah, that's sort of where I am today. About 5 years ago, I started my company, and I've never looked back. So looking forward to presenting and sharing my knowledge with you today.
Thanks, Jonathan. And yes, I had the pleasure of working in the Victorian government of Vic Roads with Jonathan over a number of years. And certainly we will be asking lots of detailed questions about the technical side of civil engineering design for raised crossings to Jonathan as we go throughout this session. Let's jump to the next slide. Now, Marissa mentioned the learning management system, and that's something you need access to pass this course. So if you haven't got access, email the training at safesystemsolutions.com.au. Marissa will look into that for you, but you should have got an email. It may have jumped into your junk folder, so have a look there if you haven't, but you should have got access to that. Now, the chat function, as has popped up there, is how we want you to communicate, or the Q&A function there. So probably the easiest way for this to work is, if you're just making comments on different things, use the chat. If you've got a direct question you want Jonathan to answer or myself to answer, pop it in the Q&A and I will feed those through. Now, the reason we use this webinar version of Zoom is so we don't hear your dogs barking in the background, and we don't hear the shouting at colleagues and all that happens with the forgetting to unmute and the like. But it does mean we don't get to have that in-person interaction as much. So we really need you to do that through the chat and the Q&A. So in the chat, talk to everyone. You've got that drop down, and put your comments in as you see things and you think about things, and off we will go. We will take you through the learning management system a little bit at the end, just to show you where the quizzes are and the like. Okay, let's jump to the next slide now. And, to incentivize you to get involved, we're giving out prizes. And you'll get prizes if you answer questions, even if you ask great questions, we can give out prizes. Marissa just is good friends with Australia Post because she's just sending out prizes nonstop out to people who win prizes. So get involved, answer the questions, pop good questions in. And let's go to the next slide. Now we have a competency benchmark. So we are going to require you to do a bit of work, nothing overly taxing, but we're going to ask you to come to both of the live webinars. If you have to watch the recording, we understand, but we love you here live because we will take your questions. We'll go down different tracks. We'll ask you questions. And there are quizzes. It's an 80% pass mark, but you've got 3 attempts. And if you're really struggling there, maybe after an attempt or don't quite get your head around things, we'll give you some one-on-one coaching. We'll organise a meeting with Jonathan or myself, and we can nut through some of that, really get you to understand the concepts we're trying to get across. Okay, so the Race Crossing Principles course with Bridget, Prue, Hafez, and myself, some of you have done that. We take a sort of higher level view. I start to dig into the engineering aspects, the road design aspects of race crossings, but we now need to go into further detail on the how. And this is where Jonathan comes into play. So jump on to the next slide there. And I'm going to hand over to you now, Jonathan, at this point. I'm going to jump in and have a look at the chat and the Q&A, but let's roll our sleeves up and get into some race crossing design.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for the introduction there, Ken. Let's jump in, guys. So let's have a look just quickly at the sort of agenda and schedule for our training on day 1 and on day 2. So on day 1, what we're looking at, it's the fundamentals of what the project may be. So we're looking at the project scope in itself. What is our race safety platform project going to, or what do we want it to be? Then we're also going to be looking at site validation. And that's taking what we want our project to be and understanding, okay, well, we know what we want, but what does it need to be for our specific site? Something might work perfectly, and other times things might need to be molded to a particular site. Don't worry, there's still lots of nerdy design details in that, and site validation itself has a huge amount of engineering to back it up. Then on day 2, what we're talking about on day 2 is drainage solutions and the geometric design solutions. That's where the bulk of the nerdy detail is, and I'm really looking forward to obviously talking through that. That's my area of expertise, as is most of this today, and pavement design principles as well. Then taking away from my particular area of expertise is then lighting design principles. So we've made that available offline by Jamie Robertson's presenting on that one. We've made that available offline for you all. There's some really great detail in that, and that is available for you to watch at in your own time. So what day 2 is really about is then the fundamentals of actually designing a race safety platform. So let's jump in, guys. Great. So what we're looking at here, this is a fairly typical race safety platform that's doing what it needs to do for a particular site. And we can look at it and say, this is great, the job's well done. We've got a shared use path priority crossing here with the yellow pavement markings. Here's our race safety platform itself. We've got some curb extensions, etc. And what I'm thinking is, okay, great. We've got our ramps and our platforms, that's good. And a bulk of that has been covered really well in Ken's introductory course. But we've also got the curb extensions, and we might be wondering, why do we include them, or when would we include them, and how do we include them into our project? We've got roadside paths to start to think about. And yes, these projects aren't limited to what happens on the pavement surface itself of the road. There's other things outside that we need to consider. And that also takes us towards drainage solutions, what we need to do to mitigate drainage issues or just catch water and take it somewhere else. Beyond all these engineering, we've also got all these engineering principles. We've also got other roadside matters. So things like trees and even the roadside grades themselves. And of course, my favorite thing of all, as I often laugh with Ken, but services. So that's our Telstras and our gases and our water. And services are a passion of mine. I passionately dislike them most of the time, but sometimes I passionately love them. But we've also got along with services, of course, service clashes, which cause great distress to many a designer over the course of a project. Managing all of these things is a big part of what a project needs to be. And already, hopefully, I'm illustrating that a race safety platform project grows quite quickly beyond the road itself and starts to need to consider various other elements. Okay, so that's just a quick overview. Let's jump into actual project scoping though. And this is where we're shaping our design solution. So we're understanding what we wanted our project to be. And of course, a huge part of project scope is our friend, the wombat, surrounded in coins, budget. So I'm just going to have a quick overview of budget. I won't be going in significant detail here, and a lot of the budgetary concepts will be covered as we progress throughout the course. But just as an overview of what budget means for us, we've got low-cost solutions and high-performing solutions. So a low-cost solution such as this, where we've got the raised safety platform meeting flush, ramped down, flush to the curb, also saw cut directly into pavement. The cost of installation here is a lump of asphalt shaped and some pavement markings on top. So that's a very low-cost solution. It's an excellent example of a low-cost solution, and we'll actually be drawing on this example later on in the course as well. Then across to the right here, we've got a high-performing solution that appears to be, well, it's part of a broader road rehabilitation project, so there's extra pavement works either side. We've no longer got the ramping down to the curb. We've got the path and the raised safety platform meeting at grade for nice and easy access for pedestrians. Then in terms of drainage, we've also got budget considerations. So we've got something like here, which is a very nice example of a low budget solution. So this is a box drainage solution where water flows through the curb. It's intended to continue through and flow to whatever existing drainage infrastructure there may be for a site. You can also see there's some debris in there, and we'll be discussing some of these sort of issues on day 2 when we discuss drainage. Then on the right-hand side, we've got a high-performing solution again. So this is double side entry pits. I love to see this. This is really great. We're basically operating such that if it minimises blocking having 2 side entry pits like this. It involves having extra drainage infrastructure and underground pipe installation, but this is a great example of a high-performing drainage solution. So that's all we're going to discuss today about budget. Like I suggested, we will be going into more detail into cost considerations as we progress throughout the course though. Now, as I'm presenting, I'll be presenting up these summary slides as we go. I won't necessarily run through them in any detail because the majority of the information or all of the information is likely being covered in discussion. However, I'll put them up just for a few seconds and you'll be able to reflect back on them, and as you're rewatching potentially the training course videos, you'll be able to pause on these and just have a look at some of the key overarching points that we're making. Now, moving forward from budget, let's start to talk about materials. And to get our brains buzzing and involved, I think we'll run into a bit of a poll almost straight away here, Ken. And what we're looking at here is an asphalt material for our raised safety platform. And I'm hoping we can pop up a poll, and I'd like you all to get involved and suggest what are the sort of benefits that we might think that asphalt has for our raised safety platform as a material choice.
Okay, so now polls should be popping up on the screen. Occasionally somebody's firewall will block the poll, but hopefully you'll be seeing it on screen. Now, you're not being marked on anything that happens in the live session. It's only in the session, the after session, that will you'll actually be marked on. Janet also popped in there around lighting being a budgetary consideration too, and we will cover off some lighting stuff. And we actually recorded an extra bit on lighting, didn't we, Jonathan? We've got Jamie.
That's right. Absolutely, yeah. So we've got an extra section on lighting, and I guess the key point of the budgetary slide is that we are the requirements in there, but we can aim for a cheaper solution or a high-performing solution based on the environment we're working in. So we've got that poll up there. There's no wrong answers for this poll. Occasionally, some of our interactive moments will have some incorrect and correct answers, but for now, it's just to get a feel for what we're thinking in terms of the suitability, or sorry, what makes asphalt an excellent choice potentially.
Now, while the last people pop that in, I've just been having a little bit of discussion behind the scenes with just been around the yellow marking of a crossing. So we will talk a little bit more about that later on. But there's the Australian standard, which is out of draft form at the moment, which specifies the signs and pavement colour layout for these are shared path crossings, and if you're in Victoria, the road design note on raised intersections actually has this shared path configuration. So happy to provide that. I might even pop that into the chat as some links just for people. But let's end that poll now. and we'll have a look at the results there, Jonathan. I'll let you talk to and analyse what people are thinking on this one.
Sure thing. Okay, great. So we've got, well, as it could be expected, a bit of a mixed feeling there. But we've got a like for the fact that it integrates well with asphalt roads, and that's an absolute winner. So good work, everyone who's picking those sort of options, because it really is true. Asphalt integrates perfectly into the very most common road construction materials, which is an asphalt pavement. It is a good durability type of solution. It's very cost effective, again, with that fact that asphalt roads are very common in Australia. Line marking stands out. There's a little bit of interest in that. Our least beneficial being be placed with a thin layer. That can have some really good benefits. It can mean that we can install a relatively low cost solution without having to dig up significant amounts of pavement and reconstruct sub-base layers and reforming subgrades, etc., for things like concrete. So that's fantastic though to get everyone involved. Thanks a lot for your interaction there. Good to see some brains ticking away. Now let's move on from asphalt and bring that conversation to concrete. So again, we'll run through a poll, but I just want to chat about this image just quickly. So what we're looking at here is a really good example of a concrete installation. It's cut directly into some asphalt pavement. It's a bit of patching here, of course. But it's also done that nice charcoal colour, which is good to see as well. It's full width across the pavement, formed nicely. So I like this solution a lot.
And Jonathan, just thought I'd say I'm glad you like that solution, because the designer's actually one of the attendees of the
fantastic. Lucky. Lucky you did a good job.
And, hello, Andrew from Sept in there.
Yeah, well, excellent work, Andrew. I'm very fond of this, and thanks for letting me pinch your excellent work for an example in our training course today. So I might jump into another poll just to keep people getting interactive here, Ken. So rather than talking about the benefits, let's have a chat about what we think some of the issues are for the use of concrete. We've got things like relatively high construction cost and relatively thick construction layers, which is basically the inverse of the previous discussion on asphalt, and also material colours that they may obscure line marking. So just answer away there. Again, there's not really a wrong answer. It's just to get a feel for what we think about concrete.
Okay, people popping in some answers. So you can see we're trying to get you interactive and get in there.
That's right. Don't worry, the whole day won't be polls and interactive moments, but it is nice to kick off the whole training course with this sort of interaction.
Yeah, and again, a nice comment in there from Andrew around the use of the pigment in the concrete to get things to the line marking to stand out, which that line marking can be a challenge, can't it?
That's right, absolutely. And we'll be chatting about that, funnily enough, very shortly. Hopefully, yes. I wonder if the designer of the next slide's going to be here today. Yeah, that's great. So we've got interesting results here. Yeah, it's sort of how I'd imagined. I mean, we've got a relatively high construction cost is in the 4s and the 5s predominantly, and then sort of in the middle for the thick construction layer issue, which reflects the previous thoughts on asphalt as well. And material colour is a little bit spread around the 3 to 5 range. And that's it's good. And I guess having the designer here making excellent comments already does highlight the fact that, yes, there are some pigmentation options for concrete, and that some of those issues that concrete may have can be resolved. So if this was a very light coloured concrete, you might have some issues. And let's just have a look at the next slide to discuss that, because this is a great site, and I better be careful about what I say in case the designer's here, but I'm not the fondest of this solution, but I do think it's nice. I mean, it's creative, Ken, and I like it. It begs the question, is a zebra black with white stripes or white with black stripes? But in road design, zebras should be black with white stripes, is my opinion. And so what's happening here is that in hindsight, or perhaps as a post-installation, I think it was actually, the white coloured concrete is being painted with black stripes to create the effect of zebra crossing. I'm not sure that's quite how I would have liked to see it. I probably would have preferred to see the entire area black with them white painted again on top of that, just to reinforce the road design requirements. Okay, so that's an excellent example of the pigmentation issue for concrete there. Let's just move on to the next slide, though. We'll keep on talking about materials for a little bit longer. I might skip the poll on this one, Ken, and just keep on chatting through. So what we're looking at here is then pavers. So not so much in this area over here, but pavers on the ramp sections. And you can see already that what this is doing is it's creating a really good aesthetic option for the environment. And that's great. I'm not against this. It's excellent in town centres, and it may work really well with urban design solutions for various areas that your project may be in. The key issues really are, though, that it's expensive to form. I mean, these are often hand laid, and it can be therefore quite expensive to maintain. So if a paver rolls up, you need the same paver size, and potentially even if it's a particular pattern, you may need the same paver colour to replace that. And then we've also got another issue that I'm going to go in and talk about in a bit more detail in the next slide, though. And it's probably the key issue with pavers. It's something just to be aware of in your projects if you are considering this as a material. So here we've got a picture that I took about 12 months after this project was completed. This is not a project I designed, but it was a project I was having a look at the time. And what we're looking at here may not be obvious until I jump to the next inset. And what we're looking at here is 12 months in, this line marking for our very important zebra line marking, pavement markings, is already wearing away. And the truth is that pavement markings don't necessarily bond very well to pavers. And I say necessarily because there's a million paver types out there, and they may not all be tested or rated for line marking to be installed upon it. And some might work, but typically I'd be very wary about line marking on top of pavers. So sure, this solution is working nicely here, where there's no line marking, but as a solution that is marked to present that road rule requirement, I'd be wary of it. So jumping to the next slide, then of course we also have combinations, though, of materials. So what we're looking at here is a really good example of that. We've got our bluestone borders for asphalt ramp, for a bluestone border to a concrete path and rolling over the other side. And interestingly enough, also as an excellent illustration of the paver issue and line marking, you can also see that on the bluestone areas, the pavement marking that's quite old, but it is bonding very nicely to our asphalt, is wearing off quite quickly or easily, on our bluestone pavers. So it's another good example of that issue. So that's a bit of a summary of a bit of a run through of the key materials that you may be considering. Of course, there's various other options out there, but that is the fundamental materials you consider for a race safety platform. Just going to pop this summary slide up here quickly. There might be a few benefits and issues that we didn't discuss in detail, but yeah, just feel free to reflect on these at another date.
One of the ones just that came in as a question was around the potentially slippery surface of some of the pavers.
Absolutely, as well. Yeah, fantastic pick up there. I'd say that pavers, you should always be wary and always consider those types of issues, because they're not just an aesthetic outcome, they're an engineering solution. And there are slip resistance requirements in Australian standards for trafficable foot traffic areas. And again, the line marking issue. Okay, so that's a great question or great comment to make. Thank you.
And I think it might be a prize-worthy comment. There's our first prize.
Yeah, absolutely.
Add there.
Great work. Okay, so let's just have a quick run through of the crossings and their sort of purpose and their location. A lot of you will know exactly every item I'm about to run through, but it's just worth providing this summary. So, of course, we've got our wombat crossings. That's the zebra crossing on the raised safety platform. We've then got bicycle crossings. So, various jurisdictions, this would be the green pavement, again, on the raised safety platform. We've then got, as was discussed recently by Ken, we've got the yellow pavement markings that is on the raised safety platform for a shared path priority crossing. And then we've got various combinations as well. So you might have not really various combinations. I guess it's just combinations of the wombat crossing and the bicycle crossing where they're independent. There's a few road rule scenarios in which this may operate better for your project. However, with the predominance of shared use paths in the area, these might become less common in the near future. Then, of course, we've got speed cushions and other uses that may not be at the crossing location itself. So these help control speeds on approach to areas, to crossing locations. The focus of our course won't be on speed cushions themselves. The majority of the engineering information is directly applicable. There might be some scenarios in which speed cushions are slightly different. And if you did have any questions about them in particular, or if they're the focus of a project you're currently undertaking or about to undertake, please feel free to send us some questions and we'll be happy to respond outside of this course. You'll also notice that in that discussion, and that we're focusing a lot on the discussion of crossings themselves. This is a race safety platform course. Again, the engineering principles about how a platform works and why certain things are the way they are, and drainage solutions, etc. They will apply to non-crossing related race safety platforms as well. Okay, so that's our sort of purposes covered. Let's just have a quick chat about locations. There's not a lot to say here, but we do have at intersections where they're set back from the stop line. We'll discuss them shortly. We've got intersection locations where they're at the stop line itself, and that's referred to as a threshold crossing or a threshold location. And then we've also, of course, got mid-block locations as well. So let's have a chat a little bit more about this threshold location. They may not be ideal everywhere, but they might also be necessary at a few projects that you're looking at due to some constraints. Let's just have a chat about them though, because there are a few issues to consider. So here we've got a pretty standard threshold crossing. What we've got is the curb line continuing through here. They've put in a disc channel here to continue drainage through. That's a really good outcome for drainage. This race safety platform then ramps up from that channel to the crossing location, back down. Clearly, this isn't a priority crossing of any type, so it has vehicle priority. That's what I'd refer to it as, but there's no wombat crossing here. But the principles are still the same as what I'm about to discuss, or almost the same, which I'll discuss shortly. And so here, I'll just use a bit of funky animation to illustrate an issue that we might need to consider for a threshold location. And that's when a wombat drives a car up to the stop line location, it blocks the crossing. Now, that's not the end of the world, right? And in certain scenarios, this crossing location is good, but something to consider is that it may interfere with the operation of the crossing. And in high pedestrian demand areas, particularly if this was a wombat crossing, it might not be operating how you'd hoped. And you might even find that pedestrians start to walk around behind vehicles. That can be self-managed, but at a design level, there are some other considerations that you can have a look at. Let's just chat more about threshold locations though, in terms of, well, sure, there's those vehicle issues, but there are benefits to them, and or reasons probably is even a better way to describe reasons to consider them. So why would we consider them? Well, it might really constrain property lines. And that example back here is a good example where even prior to the car pulling up, you can see this is a very urbanised environment in Brunswick, Victoria. And what we've got is a footpath hard against the curb line. And to tell somebody to walk all the way down here might become less desirable. So they suit constrained property lines, and they match pedestrian design lines. So pedestrians just happy to walk in a continued path of travel. They simplify drainage, as I discussed. So that's another benefit for us. And then hinting towards the road rule considerations, well, many people say if this was a wombat crossing or with the stripe, with the zebra markings, or if there was no markings, such as the example I used in that picture earlier, what's the real difference? And there's not a huge difference. So if it was vehicle priority, no wombat crossing, no zebra markings, then vehicles still need to give way to a pedestrian crossing here for all movements except one. So for the right in, still need to give way. The right in needs to stop here, let someone cross. For the left in, same, they need to wait and let somebody cross. The only movement that the pedestrian does not have right of way is for the minor road approach here. So a vehicle can, according to the road rules, can pull up here in front of a pedestrian who needs to give way to the vehicle. Then if it was a path user priority, so a wombat crossing or any other priority crossing, then all the same movements except the vehicle approaching must give way to them. They can then, after they've given way to a pedestrian crossing, they can then still pull over here, block the crossing until they're able to turn out. So they don't need to keep a crossing clear if it's at a threshold location. Just moving on to the next slide here. So then we've also got our setback arrangements though. So unlike the threshold crossing along this sort of direct line here, we could then set back. And having discussed through the previous slide, you're probably already aware that the key benefits are that it allows some storage for vehicles here. So that's our right turn in vehicle is allowed to store at this location. And there's a real benefit in that, particularly in your road environment such as this, where it's a busier main road and a minor side road. It has, in particular, really good benefits for vehicles who are storing to turn right, who may be looking at oncoming vehicles, who might even be picking gaps. And I'm not suggesting you pick dangerous gaps as a motorist, but what this does do is it allows a vehicle to transfer their attention from looking down the road to giving way to a pedestrian or a cyclist in this example using the crossing, and then able to pull up safely, clear of the traffic lanes at the stop line here. So it's a really good outcome for the motorists and for the path users, and it also keeps the path itself clear for use. So it has great outcomes for higher volumes of path usage and crossing usage. Of course, the same applies in reverse as well. So it enables a vehicle to store at the stop line clear of the crossing location. You might be wondering about the sort of distances here, what would be ideal and what's required. There's not strict requirements, but I would say that around about 6 metres covers your standard passenger vehicle at 5.4 metres roughly length. That's a great value to use. Some jurisdictions prefer 7 metres, but I think in context-sensitive design solutions, which we'll be chatting through a lot, which is where you make a project work for the site that it is in. And I consider 6 metres is a reasonable go-to value to allow a vehicle to store. So some of the benefits for our setback crossings, it is that improved traffic performance, it's an improved crossing performance, and it has some potential safety improvements for those high volume roads, allowing vehicles to change their attention from vehicle awareness to crossing awareness before they arrive at the location. Sorry guys, just a bit gruff today in the voice, but I'll get through. So you might be wondering about some of the issues then though. And as I've just illustrated here, they may still work at constrained property lines, but there's an issue here. So where the blue line here, that is the property line, means that you might need to be walking around down the minor road to cross. Well, that changes our desire lines for our pedestrian users. And that means that someone who we want to be using these green arrows to cross, walking down the side road to cross at the location here, they're attracted to just crossing straight across. And that's not really how we want the situation to operate. And if this were greater than 6 metres, say twice that, then it might become quite unattractive to use. And you might find that the majority of able-bodied users might start to just cross at this location, which is not ideal at a design solution level at least. Okay, and there's potentially a few other issues here, and as I suggested in my notes here, we will discuss them later on in our training course.
Now, there's been a number of sort of questions that have come in, which Fantastic. You're going to be covering. You're covering bits and pieces of them as we go, so I won't jump into any of them now. But I did also want to let people know we're going to give you a short stretch break in about half an hour. Yes, that's right. Yep. Okay, great. Now, anyone who's been involved in the previous principles course might be familiar with this slide, and I've stolen it from Ken because it's an excellent illustration of a key issue that I'm about to start discussing. And it's also a good opportunity for anyone who has seen the course, and just it's a great way of reinforcing one of the key issues that we have with use of multiple lanes. So here we have multiple lanes and a zebra crossing, and we don't like these as designers and road safety enthusiasts, because they are particularly dangerous when a vehicle stopped here is blocking sight to a pedestrian using the crossing. This vehicle might be thinking, oh, they're about to take off, or why are they stopped? And they just continue through, and it can result in a serious injury or death incident where a vehicle strikes a pedestrian at speed. Multiple lanes, very bad, don't like it. So here we've got another example then that I'd like to draw on. And what we've got is some light grey lines here. That's the old intersection. Hypothetically, we've got some parking at this location, and we've thinned it out with some nice curb returns here. We've got this shorter crossing distance, and I like this. We've set it back. We've got 6 metres for our vehicle here, and it's sitting a bit on the ramp. Squeeze this solution in, but that's still fine. The crossing is clear. So there's something I don't like about this though, and it does draw on that previous slide. And I'm wondering if anyone could quickly just give us a thumbs up or a scary face if they like this. I don't hate this solution. It might be suitable, but I've already hinted that a scary face might be warranted. But what do we think about this? Because it's a fairly common outcome, a fairly common solution. Good, scary faces. Yeah, so scary faces, and a couple of comments coming in, which is good. I'll jump to the next slide to discuss before we probably jump into some questions, Ken, because I think this segues really not us. Crying face, yes, it could be a tragedy, because this is an interesting scenario where that vehicle is sitting in a position that's very similar to 2 lanes in the same direction.
This vehicle could be blocking sight lines to a pedestrian using the crossing for vehicles entering the side street. And in scenarios where it's a very limited cross-section, you may need to consider these risks and accept that the safety benefit of the crossing is still warranted. But in an example such as this, where you may have thinned the road out from the light grey curb line here that was the original curb, thinned it out, it's creating this issue. There is a way that you can actually resolve this, which you might want to consider in your projects. And that would be the introduction of a median island. That then provides a bit of extra separation for the pedestrian passing the propped vehicle, giving way to this car, gives the pedestrian time to be visible again for the car entering. So please consider median islands not as a refuge point, because they're not required for the pedestrian to actually stop here, but as a visibility aid for pedestrians using the crossing when you're providing these setback solutions. If you don't have the physical width for it doesn't mean the project's void. It doesn't mean you can't consider a wombat crossing at this location. It's just, if you can consider a median island, it may be a benefit. And you might be wondering what sort of cross sections we can fit these into, and they're very common. So an example of what we want here, it might be 2 5-meter lanes, 5 meters between curbs, and then it's a bendable rule in a scenario like this potentially, but it's a fairly standard road design rule. And then a 1.6 meter median that gives us our desirable sight distance to a pedestrian as they first set foot in the median. That's 11.6 meters. That's 2 3.5 meter lanes with 2.3 meter parking bays. That is extremely common as a cross section, as a go-to cross section in urban environments. So this fits in a common cross section. Another example, say a minimum example, would be, again, our 2 5-meter widths here. And then a much smaller 1.2 meter median that can squeeze a small sign on it. That's, again, a very common outcome. So very common width at 11.2 meters. That's 2 3.5 meter traffic lanes and slightly reduced 2.1 meter parking bays. So these solutions can fit in common urban environments. Ken, you did have those questions, so do you want to jump in and just...
Yeah, okay. So we've got one around pedestrian desire lines and the use of planter boxes and the like to change pedestrian desire line.
Yeah, sure. Yep. So, and that's a good point again. I'll just use this as an example, but if the path was up here and it was a setback, and we did bend the path down to use the crossing, we don't want them crossing here, then yes, there are some landscaping options. Be very careful, guys, about landscaping. Please don't put in luscious bushes that grow high enough to obstruct sight distance to path users. But certainly there are visible aids to say, hey, come on, guys, don't cross here, as opposed to make it almost seem optional to walk straight across. So yeah, there are some planning options, certainly. It's a good point to make.
Yeah. There's one on large vehicle stability, which you're going to be covering off in a lot of detail.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's next session, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, sorry, this session. Sorry, you've confused me.
This session. Okay, good. Something to look forward to. Thomas has popped in there a little bit around the, so identified that issue that you've sort of fleshed out now. And hello, Thomas. Good to have you on board. Cheston's rightly categorised these as dynamic visual obstruction crashes, which is good, knowing the terminology from a crash perspective. And I think for now that's good. I've got to catch up on a couple of longer ones.
That's fine. Look, I might kick into the next section, which builds upon this again. So we've also got, again, this exact same scenario, but in this example, let's just say that the road reserve width didn't allow that median island, and that with discussions and assessments, we agree that the safety improvement provided by this wombat crossing is warranted and is greater than the risk of a pedestrian sighting issue, dynamic sight issue. So here we've got this solution, and we now agree that, yes, the safety benefits are great. So I think it's good. I'm really happy with this. But when we're doing early planning, have a think about your path networks and where you're planning these. So I'm not suggesting that we'd have a game over here, but when I have a look further down the road and I realise that there's a bus depot here, I start to think about a different issue all of a sudden. Because this bus depot is pushing out buses every 5 minutes in both directions. This is a high volume bus area now all of a sudden. And yes, buses have certain height requirements for our road safety platforms, as people who have viewed the principles course would know. But I'm not even worried about the platform height here. What I'm worried about is obstruction of the crossing itself, and also potential safety issues associated with the main road here for when the very regular buses are legally required to give way. So here we've got a bus propped at the stop line. They need to be so that they can see out. Well, they're blocking our crossing, and that might be acceptable. It really might for lower volume areas, and this is still a great safety outcome if the volume's supported. We've also then got the issue of a bus blocking the through lanes for when they're giving way to our pedestrian using this crossing. For the 12.5 metre example of a bus here, this crossing might be acceptable, and we might be able to just push it down a little bit further and let them cross around behind. So that could be good. If this was a truck depot with 26 metre B doubles and we weren't too far down the planning phase, I'd be saying, guys, okay, well, let's have a think about our strategic route here for our pedestrian and path users, and perhaps I'd like to find a way to get them up to the north side, so somewhere else in the network. Is there a way we could have got them up here to avoid this clash altogether? We've had some great chats, Ken and I, and various other road safety professionals about what are the merits here and what are we trying to achieve. And 9 times out of 10, the introduction of a safety improvement for a crossing location out trumps an operational issue for buses, etc. However, early in planning, we could resolve these issues, and please don't forget to think about where these crossings are, what the road environment is, and who's using the road. Let's move along. Also, so just making the point here that vehicle types, they don't only affect our ramp heights, that they do need to be considered at a strategic level as well.
And that was covering off a question that did come into the Q&A around buses and those setups. So thank you for that. And we've had a little bit of discussion in there around when we put that refuge island type, median island, splitter island style thing. What does it do in terms of creating 2 crossings or 1 crossing? And I mean, my take on it is that if you mark that as a zebra crossing throughout, it is 1 crossing.
Absolutely.
You would not need to use it as refuge, and you wouldn't put DDA tactiles in the middle because it's just
That's
one
correct.
continuous crossing. It just, exactly as you rightly highlighted, it means there's a section where a vehicle can't be blocking that sideline.
Yeah. Yep. And there are benefits to it. And look, don't walk out of this course, guys, thinking, oh, we need a median island everywhere, because it's not necessarily the right solution for the project or the site. But if there's an opportunity and the issue is identified, then that is a solution to the issue of site distance. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think another good thing to point out is the importance of raising the crossing as well.
Absolutely.
Below those vehicles. So if you're slightly not getting exactly what you want, the raised nature of it, the slowness of the vehicle going through this conflict point just brings that risk right down.
It does, yes, absolutely.
All right, keep going. Loving
There's a few
this.
supporting treatments as well. Yep. So yeah, a few supporting treatments I'll just run through. I won't go into significant detail, but as almost alluded to then, there are scenarios in which you might want to reinforce the awareness here. So you ask yourselves the questions of, is it alerted driving, or is it one of many raised crossings, or is it sort of the first one in town and people won't be expecting it? Is it at the town border and people aren't as alerted? Perhaps there's a regulatory speed change nearby, so people are traveling 80 and then they're just entering a 50 zone, and this is the first thing that happens as a raised safety platform. Doesn't mean it's a bad solution, but we might want to increase awareness to that site. And also there are scenarios in which site distance is compromised. I mean, engineering acts like it's a conformance game, but it's not. We need to be context sensitive with our solutions, and we need to think about what's the overall outcome of the project. So if your site distance is compromised, it doesn't mean that it's game over, but it means that you need to think very carefully about what that does to the site. So in any of these scenarios, you can consider supporting treatments, and that's things like, sure, advanced warning signs, so alerting in advance of a crossing, the likelihood, sorry, not the likelihood, the presence of a crossing further down the road. It's also things like our flashing light installations, and something that in Queensland, it's referred to as township entry treatments. There's community gateways, as a phrase in other jurisdictions, etc. But this is a great solution for that scenario where you are near a regulatory speed change, say on the approach to a township. What these do is they just provide change in the road environment that the most is travelling through that changes them from their relatively unalerted, say, rural driving into, oh, wait a second, I'm entering a town. Okay, change my attention, get ready for various things, including potentially a raised safety crossing. Okay, so how are we going for time? Look, we're going pretty good. Let's jump into site validation, Cam, at this stage, moving forward, and then shortly into that, we'll take a bit of a break, I'm thinking.
That's good.
Great. Okay, so that was the overall project scoping section there. And now what I'd like to do is talk about that site validation. So as I said at the start, it's taking our scope and saying, we want this. And then looking at where we're putting it and saying, oh, okay, well, what does this need? Oh, that doesn't look ideal. And it's about taking what we want and applying it to a site. Please do get out there and validate your sites, guys. Don't assume that, say, a 2D drawing that looks really good works when you actually might be on a steep hill, etc. And going out on site can very quickly make you understand some of the challenges that you might have. And getting out there early means you can tackle those challenges really nicely early on. So what is site validation in even more detail? It's looking at our road geometry. That's the existing road itself, that what we're going to place our crossing or our race safety platform on. That's things like looking at the traffic lane widths and our parking. Is there parking present? What's the road crossfall doing? And what's the actual road grades like? Is it flat or is it steep? It's also looking at our race safety platform itself. So that's our ramps and our platforms. That's covered in detail in the principles course. But it's also then, well, curb extensions. Do we need them? What benefits do they provide for our site? And also, as we've discussed earlier, median islands. Is there an opportunity or warrant, or are they a benefit for our project? Then we've got our road and roadside features. So as I keep on saying, or I said early on at least, we're not limited to the road surface itself and a piece of asphalt or concrete lifting up a certain number of millimetres. We have things to consider either side of the road. And that's our property lines and what they mean for our project, and our roadside batters and the slopes of our roadside, and also some physical obstructions that we might not have thought were there, or we might not have considered until we're into our design phase, and that's things like driveways and trees, etc. We've got road users as well, which we've alluded to as well. That's things like the presence of heavy vehicles, and is there on-road cyclists though, and the buses and bus infrastructure, like what does the road need to do apart from the crossing location? And is our crossing complement them, or is there potential interference or clashes between them that we need to consider in design? And of course, service authorities and their assets, which I always pause on because just this morning they were very tricky for me. But so above ground services, of course, underground services, they are everywhere, and they can be in the road, under the road, and in the roadside, almost anywhere, any depth. So why validate the site? Well, it is because we can get better solutions, understanding what our project needs to be rather than finding out too late. And that gives us better budgets, and it gives us fewer surprises. And for anyone in delivery or operations, we all know fewer surprises means variations and stronger budgets and more confidence in our solution. So that is a great reason to validate a site. It's a great reason to get out there as soon as you're starting to design, and not looking at it after you've designed, using the site validation to inform the design process. So that's why I'm focusing on site validation today too, is that it informs our design. So let's just jump in and have a look at cross-sectional design validation. So we'll be talking through cross-sections, and I'll be using this image here quite regularly. So I'm just going to go through exactly what we're looking at here in detail, just so we understand as we're reflecting on it in further stages in today's training course. So we've got on the outside some blue lines, and that's our hypothetical property boundaries. We've got some roadside features, so we've got some slopes here, and we've also got footpath on the left-hand side, and some slopes here, and a shared use path on the right-hand side here. Then we've got our curb lines here. So we've got 2 B-type curbs in this scenario, and then our actual existing road itself. And in this scenario, we've got parking bays either side of some traffic lanes. And even potentially, and this might be on your sites, you've got changes in crossfall as well, potentially. So our traffic lanes are at 3% here, and then our parking bays are actually at 5%, so they steepen up a little bit. So speaking about our parking, let's jump in, chat about parking. So parking bays for our existing site, when you're out there validating it, one of the first things you notice is there's parking or there isn't. And that can change some of our solutions and change some of what we may want to install for our site. So let's take a look at this example quickly. And just wondering if in the chat, if anyone can really quickly type in what sort of concerns I might have for an installation such as this with a full width wombat crossing on a road with traffic lanes and parking either side.
Okay, well, there's a few things while people have a think about that that I just wanted to cover off. Okay, they're coming in. Oh, they're coming in thick and fast. Use of flashing lights. Yes, so thank you for that. And thanks, Tom, for clarifying that. If you're in Victoria, it's in the supplement to AS 1742 Part 10. I'm not sure in other jurisdictions where it is stated, but they talk about 60 pedestrians crossing and 500 vehicles to trigger flashing light use. So it's just, as Tom said, that's the principle of it: higher volume, higher use. It's really trying to further highlight the crossing, as Jonathan said. The use of red coloured surface underneath the white lines is something that is generally discouraged based on some contrast challenges for people with some slight vision impairments or different colour vision impairments. So that's generally discouraged. I know that the City of Yarra has used a few of those. I think they stand out quite well. I can see colours though, so I am always interested to get those other perspectives. I would love to see some more information and some trialling and of that, but we haven't got that yet. Okay, so sorry about that, Jonathan. I took that slightly off course, but hopefully you've been able to see the chat. What do we got there? Drainage, parked vehicles obscuring sight lines.
Great, big win. I think, I love the involvement, but the big win that I like is the obscured sight lines for the crossing itself by parking.
All right, well, who was first onto that? Looks like Janet, prize winner there.
Good, Janet, thank you very much. And just for anyone missing out on Janet's perspective there, and various other people I'm sure would have raised some great points, but that was the area that I wanted to discuss just now. And so the issue is that vehicles parked in these sort of locations, and this was covered nicely again in the principles course, in these locations block sight distance for a vehicle citing someone using the crossing. And there's a few treatments that we can consider here for what we might want to do. I mean, there's some sort of less exciting treatments like banning parking. And this is based on, this is an example that's just showing 10 metres and 20 metres before and after the crossing location. That's a fairly standard road rule application. However, even this itself, I mean, that's not necessarily going to give you perfect sight lines in every scenario. I'd still suggest that you really should be checking sight lines if you're looking at just banning parking. And that could be in things like tight radius curve locations, etc. But of course, we've also got our curb extensions, and this is why I'm bringing this up in the validation process. Is you might be thinking, we want to cross in here, you head out there, or you're aware that you're looking at there and you already know there's parking, etc. We should be thinking sight distance. Okay, do we have budget for curb extensions? Do we want to install them, etc.? Because what curb extensions do is they bring the pedestrian on the roadside to a crossing point with much, much better visibility to approaching motorists. And it also shortens crossing distance, which is really nice to see as well. And that whilst they still have priority, there can be some other benefits to that. I'll be chatting about that shortly. So let's have a look at this curb extension example where there is some parking to consider. And let's look at it at a real site now and something more realistic about how we may need to adopt these solutions. So just a thumbs up and a scary face if you so wish, but what do we think about this site here? And look, it's not shocking at all. There's a few things to discuss, but I want to get your take on it, please.
Well, that comes in. Lucas is going to get a prize for something that I did not know.
Oh, very good.
Which is that flashing lights on zebra crossings or pedestrian crossings is not permitted in Queensland.
I was unaware of that too. Okay, that's really good to know. Thank you. Not that I'm designing one of these projects in Queensland at the moment, but yeah.
There you go. Thanks, Lucas.
Teaching teachers, very good.
It's a good example there whether we can get lots of learning from across the group. So if you know things about these particular things we're talking about, pop it into the chat. Thank you.
And as I saw those thumbs up and scary faces streaming along, it seemed like a lot of people had the thumbs up, and there were some people concerned here. And the thumbs up is great. It is true, because it's not a terrible outcome here. We've got the curb extension coming around, and that enables someone to walk to this location here and continue along the path, so along the crossing, whilst having much better visibility for approaching motorists. The landscaping here is nice and small. I hope it stays that way, but that should work out pretty well. There's some potential obstructions for signs and small children near schools, etc. But generally, this is operating pretty well. But there is something I don't like about this, and it's an interesting one, and it's something for you to consider in your projects too, though. This is near an intersection. It's a give way condition up here, as you can see from the line marking. And a vehicle approaching here might turn the indicator left to turn left, and that's good. We expect that. But there's also a parking bay here. And while this parking bay, the visibility obstruction is reduced for crossing here, a vehicle in reverse parks into this space needs to take a maneuver that goes something like this, so that they drive up onto the platform with their left indicator on. That's all good. Well, is it though? Because they're about to reverse. And with the left indicator on, they need to reverse into this space. There's a few other issues that come from that, which is that the cars behind might be confused. Why are they doing that? Are they turning left? And also, a pedestrian path user might be confused. And whilst the vehicle's propped here about to reverse, they might decide to walk around behind them, based on their own use of judgment. And so some of those issues are concern-worthy. If this was a very high volume pedestrian usage crossing, then I'd say that concern raises significantly to the fact that I'd be looking at trying to ban parking here personally, or discussing that, because the risk of somebody eventually reversing here is significantly greater when lots of people are likely to be walking behind them. Again, it is context sensitive though, and in this solution here, this is in Carlton in Victoria, I'd say this is probably operating pretty well. I know the exact location very well. I was out here having a look at it, of course. And I think that it probably operates fine, but something to consider is the actual vehicle movements that are required near these curb extensions. And I won't leave you with some mysterious good luck out there commentary. What I'll do is I'll just jump in and I'll explain to you how I would consider appropriate usage of or appropriate distances to consider. Because when I'm designing these types of solutions, which have parking close to curb extensions, I'd be saying that we want roughly, and again, this is context sensitive, you can use your judgment to decide how you would apply these principles. But I would be considering, ideally, from the toe of the ramp, 6 meters to the nearest car space. And that means that a vehicle back here can stop while this vehicle's got its indicator on and is starting to reverse in. They can give them room for that. And it also means on the departure side that a vehicle who's giving way to another vehicle reversing into this sort of position, they can stop clear of the crossing. So 6 and 6 is a really good starting point for your project. You may have other vehicle lengths to consider, and you might even want to squeeze things up a little bit more and let people pull up onto the ramps, etc. But that's, yeah, a great go-to. Just a little bit more before we take a break here, guys. Let's jump into discussing again a little bit more about crossing locations and parking environments. So here we've got a different parking situation. We've got an angled parking. We've got much wider traffic lanes to allow for these parking maneuvers. So that's 8.6, 4.3 apiece. And then we've got these much wider carriageway here and a full width crossing. So thumbs up, scary face, guys. What do we think?
So while people decide whether they like this or not, just a few things to cover off. There's a few bits of discussion around the use of a single hazard marker, which is it is a treatment you would use for any sort of raised curb outstand or the like, or particular things. So that looked all pretty good. And yeah, setback crossings on roundabouts are generally preferred, as per Jonathan's past one, which was at a sort of T intersection, but the same principle applies at a roundabout. If you can set it back, that's sort of 4 meters, somewhere around that, 4, 5, 6, without going too far off the pedestrian desire line. That just gives that ability for somebody to prop and wait setback around that. Okay, back to you, Jonathan.
Okay, great. Yeah, lots of scary faces there and a few thumbs up, and the thumbs up aren't incorrect either. So like there are definitely scenarios at which you just consider full width installation appropriate. However, there are a lot of issues to juggle with these longer crossings, particularly these angled parking streets, and that would be things all associated with this 18.8 meter long crossing. So that means that it's a very long crossing distance. Yes, vehicles have to give way to someone here, but it opens up a lot of opportunity for confusion. And by confusion, I mean if someone standing back here on the crossing, a vehicle turning in, this person turning in might think, wait, am I giving way to them, or can I get through? And confusion is the last thing we want at these crossings. We want them to speak for how they can be safely operated. It also might lead to traffic delay issues of someone bulking too early. They've got a long distance to cross that takes a long time to cross, and people might stop and pull up while somebody's approaching from way back here. So you can have some operational issues as well to consider. And of course, this is a safety improvement project that we're aiming for, and these confusion issues can result in an increased risk for the project itself. So we don't want that. The solutions that we look at here, again, these curb extensions are a great solution. There might be some median island examples, but looking at curb extensions, we've got a solution like this. So I put in some curb extensions into this example. Old curb lines in grey, significantly shortened our crossing distance, which is great. And you want to ask yourself, okay, so what are we going to aim for there? So we have this very wide crossing. Well, what do we want for our crossing distance? And there's a few Australian standards and Austroads give you some references for this sort of information. It's a little bit conflicting, so I'll help talk through my take on it and also how to apply some of those standards. So what we have is some examples for what crossing distance might mean for an actual crossing location. And this is typically referring to actually non-wombat styles or non-zebra crossings, but the principle still applies somewhat. Austroads Guide to Traffic Management, great reference document. It says, ideally, we don't want this more than 8 meters long. Okay, that's good to know. But then in Austroads Guide to Road Design, they say, we've got a preferred maximum of 10 meters. And that's also good to know. And what these are talking about is typically how long it takes to get across the road. So there's some references that you can use for your operational benefits here. But then we've also got issues where guides discuss residual widths for cyclists. So here, and this is a really good example in our angled parking crossing locations, where our traffic lanes are actually quite wide just to meet typical Australian standard requirements for a reversing vehicle. That means that what might have typically be a 3.5 metre lane might be a 4.3 metre lane or even larger. And that means that on-road cyclists, whether it's a principal part of a principal bike network or not, they can safely travel next to a vehicle at the same time. And our curb extensions might then form a pinch point for a cyclist next to a vehicle. So when we consider those rules, we start to think, okay, so maybe we want each lane to be 4.5 metres to allow for on-road cyclists. That's a good reference again from Austroads. Or if you can't fit 4.5, you might then start to think about things like the use of what's considered a wide curbside lane, which is a lane that's wide enough to allow cyclists and motorists side by side. So yes, when we're thinning out our carriageway, we might want to consider 8 metres, 10 metres, or even 9 metres, or somewhere in between. Or we might just say, actually, we don't have that width, or we're happy to consider this to be a sharing environment where cyclists come into a slow point, so that's fine, and they share the full traffic lane width with motorists, and that's using a sort of lane sharing environment such as this. So there's some options there. I'd say if in doubt, and you do have these much wider lanes, then trying to continue something roughly through is perfectly reasonable. In this example, it was 4.3 metre lanes. You might want to consider those as your preferred lane width through the crossing itself. For some high demand environments, they might say, well, high pedestrian demand environments, they might be saying, well, what's the benefit of having a cyclist next to a vehicle side by side at this location as well? And you might consider actually thinning it out to be a true slow point for all road users.
And there was a comment that came in around also needing to consider the swept path of larger vehicles that might need to enter.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, any designers out there will notice that this is, I mean, these are using fairly standard radii values, but these are drafted as example. So pick on them if you see a little tweak in the radii sizes here or there.
And one more came in. Lucas has made some comments around crossing sight distance, which I won't go into my 6-hour rant on why Austroad was incorrect to change that. But they assure me that the next version of the Austroad's Guide to Road Design will rectify that issue, because crossing sight distance is irrelevant at a pedestrian priority.
Thank you. Very true, Ken. I do love your take on that.
Yeah, they're going to change it back.
They have to. Yeah. I agree.
Anyway.
Okay, great. So just talk a little bit more about cycling. We'll take a short break, guys. So we've got our lane sharing environments, and then we also might need to consider our curb extensions and how much width is required. I mean, I was just saying, yeah, wide curbside lanes work. Maybe we want to consider the full 4.5. That's great. But our approach might actually have a formal bike lane as well. And that should be considered in what we're dictating for our width of our crossing at this location too. We also might then have separated on-road, so separated off-road connections as well. So I wish I took this photo just slightly wider, but here we've got an on-road cycle path that ramps up here to a giveaway condition to the path crossing users, and then continues into a roundabout bypass. And so this might be a better solution that allows a true slow point for motorists and avoids any conflict between motorists and cyclists through the crossing location. And I'll end us with a little bit of a quiz here before our break, guys, but I'd just like to ask you the question, then perhaps you can all take a break while we're going through this question. But I'd like to say, okay, so I've talked about curb extensions. I'm giving them a thumbs up in many scenarios, but what do they look like? And I'd like you, whilst also simultaneously taking a break, to tell me, which do you think is the best? Is it A, is it B, is it C, or is it the very mysterious, it all depends on the context of the site?
Okay, well, let's we'll pop the poll up on screen. Let's take our break now. So the poll will be there. You can ponder that. Let's take 4 minutes, and then we will come back into it straight after that. So answer the poll, have a stretch, and we'll get back into it in 4 minutes.
Great. See you soon.
Hey, we'll get back into it. Can end that poll now, and let's have a look how people decided there. Ooh.
Great. Good to see you. So people hate A, and that's a very good answer. We'll wait and see that. People love B, and it's another excellent answer. And C, of course, has various applications. That's good. And slightly less interest than B is it all depends on the context of the site. And unfortunately for almost all others, the answer is, if I'll just wake up my computer. Oh, there we go. The answer is that it does all depend on the context of the site. I do not disagree with any of the answers that also favoured one or the other, and particularly in certain jurisdictions or, say, urban environments, they might just be, we always do this and we always do that. But I'm not, again, just going to leave you with the mysterious it all depends and say goodbye to it. I'm just going to explain a few of the reasons why you might consider them, including the very least favourite A, where there's scenarios in which you would consider at least part of this as a solution for your project. So why might we consider A? Well, obstructions. I mean, the benefits of having curb extensions might outweigh a slightly short version of a curb extension here. And that might be a driveway. There's various other, of course, roadside obstructions that might be in the way, but this could be that. And yes, A is presented with very short curb extensions on all sides. I mean, you might not have obstructions everywhere, but that's a good example of why you consider it still. And then option B, I mean, what's useful about B? Lots of people love it. Lots of people love it for the right reasons. And here's just one of many, many reasons why it's good. What's useful about B is that you can find ways to make water just drain away to the existing curb lines. You might even find some existing drainage infrastructure that you can utilise. So it's also a nice smooth approach, etc. And there's arguments to say that a sharp approach encourages more of a speed reduction, but these smooth approaches are aesthetic and they work fine. And I love the drainage aspect. And so if B is good and A is good, and Sean's a bit of a speed reduction thing I just mentioned then, but why would we consider C? And flat out, it's cheaper, particularly at a brand new site. We're building less pavement. So it achieves the same outcomes for less money. That sounds like a great outcome for many, many projects. So let's just go through as a quick summary for what we just discussed about curb extensions. We've got, I won't dwell on this, but all the things we discussed, and also, of course, we've got some extras which I didn't have time to chat through, or sorry, didn't chat through. Let's cover these quickly now. It is the perceived narrowing of lanes as well, so that can help reduce vehicle speeds. And well, actually, I have chatted through most of this now. I'm looking at it. That's good. So reduce costs potentially in pavement, etc., and site distances improvement. So that's curb extensions. Let's roll into crossfall. This is an interesting one to start chatting through, Ken, and it might raise some eyebrows out there, but it's one of the really important things to do is to understand, again, your existing site where you're installing this, or perhaps on a new road, sure. What does crossfall mean for our project? And let's run a little quick poll here. I might not be too quick. There's quite a few detailed answers, but let's run a poll on this. I'm interested to see what people think about crossfall. And I won't lie to you, this is not one of those quizzes where there are all correct answers. Some of these are incorrect. So I just want to get a feel for, get your brains switched on for what we actually think is a key issue or benefit for crossfall.
Okay, people are popping their thoughts in there. I'll give them a minute as we get back into it. And we've got 45 minutes before the end of the session, Jonathan. So probably about 40 minutes for you, if possible.
Yeah, that's good, mate.
Give it 10 more seconds, and we've had some good chat from people there. I think I've got to most of them, and few I've left because they're covered off in the next session, but we're doing pretty well. And yes, angle parking to parallel parking can be advantageous in some circumstances, absolutely. Don't quite get as many car parking spots in, but it's certainly a safer outcome.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's end that and display the results.
Okay, so let's just run through these. We've got some steep crossfall can promote increased vehicle speeds, and I wouldn't suggest it really does. So there wasn't many in there, but the reason for that is that it's not an uphill or downhill issue for a vehicle. It just affects how much they're sitting on the sort of angle of the road itself. Flat crossfall may cause aquaplaning issues, absolutely true, and lots of people agree with that. Steep crossfall can affect braking distances. I mean, very similar to the increased vehicle speeds. It's not particularly a crossfall issue. It might affect some comfort around curves, etc., that technically could affect braking distances, though. Flat crossfall may be hard to see and affect sight distance, so not really a thing, guys. Apologies for that one. And steep crossfall may affect road grades and DDA. That is 92% absolutely spot on, guys, because that's a big part of what we'll be chatting about shortly. It doesn't affect raised safety platform at all. We're bringing it up here as a joke. 3% of you thought that was funny and click that one just for the fun of it. Okay, thanks, guys. So let's just move along into discussing crossfall. So I'm going to kick off with flat crossfall. Many of you already are well aware that, yes, flat crossfall can cause aquaplaning issues. Let's really quickly talk about this. This is not a training course on calculating aquaplaning, which would be a 4-hour module plus in itself, but just a few references and just things to be aware of when we're validating our site. So when you're out on site, you might have an understanding of crossfall, you might have some survey information, or perhaps you've got a fancy digital spirit level that you can take out and measure actual crossfall at certain locations. And what we're aiming for on, just say, your typical asphalt road is straight out of Ross roads, 2.5 to 3%. And that crossfall, what it's doing is it's shedding water off the road surface. That's its role when you're talking about this typical crossfall. And so if we're out on site and we're a little bit steeper than that, well, still draining well. But if we're less than 2.5, well, you're asking yourself, so you should be asking the question, are we shedding water enough off the pavement? Just hypothetically, if there was not enough water shed off the pavement and it was getting quite a thick layer of water on it, then a vehicle travelling along might start aquaplaning, which is when the vehicle tyres lift up onto the water surface and they're no longer in contact with the pavement. That means that braking is not happening anymore and vehicles are losing control and effectively sliding. So I'm bringing this up in the context of a race safety platform because less than 2.5% roads, particularly existing environments, particularly old roads, is very common. It doesn't mean you instantly have aquaplaning, but I just want us to all switch on when we're looking at our 2% and our 1% particularly and saying, wait a second, have we got an issue here? Because aquaplaning, sure, loss of control, but it increases the risk of aquaplaning when we're braking. And we're introducing a race safety platform that requires braking, or we might be introducing that into an environment that then increases aquaplaning risks. I'm not saying that if you're out there validating a site that your project doesn't work. I'm saying that you might need to have a think about changing crossfall, at least in that final approach and departure from our race safety platform to minimise aquaplaning risks. Don't jump to those as solutions, though. You can calculate it. And again, I'm not going to be teaching how to do that, but Part 5A of Austroad's Guide to Road Design has a very detailed explanation of how to calculate aquaplaning. If you have any concerns about crossfall, please don't hesitate to investigate that or go to the appropriate engineering department or even ask for professional assistance in understanding aquaplaning risks for your project. Now let's have a chat about steep crossfall. So yes, flat crossfall is pretty much limited to aquaplaning, guys. But steep crossfall is another issue, and I won't. It's sort of showing nicely in this Queensland. You took this, wasn't it, Ken? This photo.
Yeah, that's in Brisbane. Yep.
It's pretty well presented here, so I won't ask you all the questions. I'll just actually tell you that steep crossfall can be pretty bad for certain road users, and particularly people with mobility impairment. So steep crossfall does have limits for a typical path. Paths everywhere that we construct them and design them in Australia and New Zealand have DDA requirements. Your project may strictly need to meet these, or you might need to make a judgment call at your end about whether DDA compliance is the critical factor for your job. But let's assume that all of our crossings we want to be DDA compliant. And let's also say that, well, if every path either side of this crossing has DDA requirements for maximum grades, well, our crossing should too. And the truth is that it should. So I won't leave you with that as a comment. I'll just bring it up here on the page. I'll just chat through it quickly. But basically, Australian standards 1428.2, it says that there's some grades that are too steep. So anything steeper than 7% for, say, a crossing location. I mean, yes, a pedestrian ramp could be a bit steeper, but for any extended accessible path of travel, we are talking about a 7% maximum grade. And that is up to 9 metres length. So any roadway that's, say, 7% crossfall, and that's extremely steep, we all know that. I'll chat to that just shortly, has a maximum length of 9 metres. And if it's 9 to 15 metres, then we don't want it to be steeper than 5% because that starts to become arduous and difficult to travel on as well. So road designers out there in today's session might be thinking, okay, 5%, I can see that. At 7, never going to see it. Well, actually, you might see that in various scenarios, but it's particularly the 7% nature that I'd like you to focus on, because in those angled parking bays, such as the example I gave you earlier, and particularly again in rural townships where the old horse and cart style road might have its angled parking bays ducking down steeply towards the old bluestone channels and things like that, you will find that 7% is often well exceeded in some of those angled parking bays. And that if you have a crossing location that's utilising that parking bay as part of its path of travel, you might have a section that's not DDA compliant. Again, not a game over. You just need to think about what engineering solution you might want to employ there to resolve the issue. It might be curb extensions and regrading, and might be some work on the pavement surface just a little bit further than you were first anticipating that resolve that issue. And again, at 5% maximums, you might actually see them full width carriageways on a super elevated section of road, such as something like this, where, 9 to 15 metres short. More than 15 metres, unlikely until you get angled parking again. So yes, you will see these cross-sectional crossfalls sometimes exceeded. So just be aware of them in your projects. Let's pop up the summary very quickly. Everything in there should be what we've just discussed, so it's available for you to reflect on in your own time. Now, I am looking at this. I just want to see if anyone thinks that this looks normal or strange. Can I get a couple of thumbs up or just any other emoji of your choice if you think it's strange looking? Because there's something that's a little different potentially, but I think it also looks normal. Confusing. Lots of strange faces. Okay. Now, we won't go through the comments. We won't chat. I won't tell you to bombard Ken with comments in the chat window there, but it's not the red pavement, guys. We just chatted about that too. It's not the car overlapping the crossing or anything. It's the fact that all the poles are installed at very strange angles. And you'll find that this is very common when the camera person is taking the photo at a bad angle. And in fact, no, those poles aren't installed at a strange angle. This is a really, really steep road. It's extremely steep. I can't remember what it is, but it's at the higher level of steepness, and these poles are perfectly straight as you'd expect. This tree is a little bit bent. It's going to be all by now. So, steep roads. Let's talk about longitudinal grade. Steep roads, again, have requirements. And when we install a raised safety platform, we are creating a braking location. That might also be a stop location. So people at a crossing, people might be giving way to people at a crossing and be required to brake to a stop condition. For any intersection or approach to an intersection, there are requirements for maximum grades, at least in Australia, using Austroads, for instance, and other jurisdictional guidance. So from Austroads, though, we have 3% desirable and 5% maximum grades is what we'd like there. And that means that if you're looking at your site, you're out there validating your site, and you see that you've got a 7% slope, well, you start to think, well, wait a second, that's not ideal. Again, I want to reinforce every time I bring up not ideal, that doesn't mean that you don't consider the project functional or feasible, but it means you've got something to think about here. Braking is a safety issue too. Making it difficult for someone to brake on approach to a crossing location is a road safety risk, and please don't think otherwise, because that's a bad outcome. Then we've got other things to consider about just the operation of the road itself, though, for our vehicle users, and that is Mr. Wombat again, or Mr. or Mrs. or any old wombat, driving their vehicle along to this location, heading up the hill. And they have certain vehicle requirements for operation, desirable operation. So it's not likely to be the car, but 3% desirable uphill for our heavy vehicles is what a typical section of road would have from a stop condition at an intersection. And we've created that stop condition potentially at our raised safety platform. So there's some things to consider for our longitudinal grades here for our roadway itself. But of course, this is a crossing, and we've also got our DDA considerations for the crossing itself. So we've got our desirable, and so many paths around Australia will be particularly recently constructed, are just hitting 100% just right on the money with 2.5%. That's what we'd want most of our paths to be. That doesn't change. People with mobility impairment aren't suddenly relieved of their mobility impairment at a crossing location. We want to try and achieve these as much as possible, wherever possible, at our crossings too. There's a little bit of an out in Australian standards which says, oh, but on asphalt, you can use 3.3. I suspect that's in there because it's an older standard as well, is the 3.3% maximum. And it would be a shame to suddenly make half of Australia's footpaths non-compliant. But these are what we're aiming for. And when I say path crossfall, of course, that is the longitudinal grade of the road. So we've got a few things to consider there about steep grades, a few different factors, a few different values for what we might consider when we're validating our site as an issue to be considered in design. Then, of course, we've got longitudinal grades that are too flat. And I won't jump in and ask questions about, oh, why is water ponding here? It's just as simple as being too flat. And I've just put on the screen here just various examples of some of the key criteria from various jurisdictions. They're typically around the 0.3% is pretty flat, but constructible, and you can get it to flow. And that's pretty much the lower end of any standard I've seen. And then there's some newer standards that are coming out saying, and it's always been a desirable standard in many documents too, but 0.5% is now, for instance, in Austroads, the minimum, whereas it previously was 0.3%. But your site needs to consider this as a potential issue just for the operation and good outcomes for at an engineering level. Also, just a quick comment on the fact that, yes, most of our sites are curved, and you might be thinking, oh, we're putting in curb and channel, and the curb and channel should be flowing anyway. Well, these your race safety platform might be part of a bigger upgrade to a road network that doesn't currently have curb and channel, and you might be surprised and very annoyed to find out that your road grade is less than 0.3%, and you're talking about extra roadworks there. Okay, so moving along into our longitudinal summary. And Ken, any questions there?
No, we're good. Keep going.
Great. And then just a bit of pictorial mathematics for you guys. I'd like to pose you the question of, this could be a bit of an award here, Ken, if we're ready for a nice and quick trigger fingers. Truck turning around corner plus poor effective crossfall equals...
Let's see if anybody wants to get that. Murray said tip. Flip. Yep.
It's a good, quick way to answer the question, which is vehicle stability and truck falling over.
Murray gets a prize. And
great work there. I'm just going to run through vehicle stability principles with you because, yes, placing these in a road environment also may have implications for vehicle stability. Jumping in here, let's have a look at this, and I'll just say there's a lot going on here. There's hinge points and there's friction factors, there's heights of loads, there's gravity, which is pretty standard, actually doesn't change that often, but various other bits and pieces. And this looks bloody complicated to me, and I'll tell you what it is. And I'm a road designer. I don't like too complicated. I just like things to be simplified. And yes, crossfall affects heavy vehicle stability. And as a road designer, we think, well, okay, this looks good, but I just want to know what crossfall is okay and what crossfall isn't okay. So we can jump straight in and just say that luckily I'm not the only one who feels like that, and that road sign standards typically involve vehicle stability and summarize it in terms of crossfall. So here, straight out of Austroad's guides, we have -3%, so that's adverse crossfall, not working with the vehicle, is our sort of preferred go-to. But actually, our vector sum that's described us, and I'll chat through that shortly, that it's saying, oh, 5%, actually, no, 3 is too hard to get. Well, let's say 5% is our preferred maximum adverse crossfall, is in Austroad's guides. But then hidden away in the appendices as well, they say, well, God, actually, sometimes, actually, no, I think we'll make it 7%. And that's actually true because anything after 7% starts to become pretty unstable, even in a straight line, so not even turning. So let's just chat through how this all operates and what to consider for your site, because it's not just crossfall, it's the effective crossfall I refer to it as. So let's run through this diagram here. This is going straight out of Austroad's guides, but it's a good illustration of effective crossfall. And what it means is that when you're on a downhill grade of, say, 5%, and you've got, say, crossfall of 3%, and you undertake a turning maneuver, so through A, B, C, somewhere through that turning maneuver, you're getting the worst combination of the 5% downhill and 3% crossfall. And that's simply calculated as the vector sum of the two. So that's a right angle triangle with 3 on one leg, 5 on the other. Well, what's the hypotenuse? And that's all pretty nerdy. I mean, I like it. I've self-declared myself a big nerd, so I'm pretty happy with doing this sort of stuff. But also, it looks a little confusing until you think any engineers out there might think, well, actually, and this is my go-to, is 3% crossfall is very common. And the 3, 4, 5 triangle from my monotonous 3, 4, 5 triangle from my engineering studies that I can reflect on many, many, many years ago is 3% crossfall. Well, if I'm anywhere near 4% grade, well, I might have my 5% desirable maximum. And that's when I start to think, okay, we might have an overturning concern here. So this is all talking about overturning issues on a road turning. That's great. And in this example, yes, we've got a vehicle turning here with its 3% downgrade, one-way crossfall, and onto a road with 2% grade. And we say, this is great. This is 3.6% adverse crossfall. That's significantly less than the 5% I mentioned and the 7% that I said is my real cutoff. So why am I talking about this today? And why are we talking about this in road safety platforms? Well, it's because of examples like this, which is when, okay, exact same example to say. And a truck's turning here, gets to our race safety platform, and one wheel's at the top and one wheel's at the bottom. Well, that's different. And if I actually show you in our exact same example, which had our 3.6% maximum adverse crossfall or effective crossfall, well, when you actually just do the math of a 1.9 metre wheelbase and 0.1 metre high platform, well, it comes out as a 5.3 increase, and that 3.6 becomes 8.9% adverse crossfall. Sorry, this is very nerdy. I'm chatting through lots of technical stuff here, but that's significantly more than our 7% max and our desirable max. So many people here might be thinking what I'm thinking, which is this a major problem? And might be, in fact, it probably is for this exact example. But there's a lot going on, and it sort of reflects back on that first image I showed you, all the technical stuff that's actually involved in a vehicle rollover calculation. And only half the vehicles on that ramp section, as I showed earlier, it's the front half, and the back half's still back of the road. So only half the vehicles affected, and it might mean that wheel pressure plays a major role here. What's the suspension doing? How high are the loads? And is it articulated vehicle, etc.? So it is complicated. I wouldn't say every time you look at a site that you're over 5%, it doesn't work, because that's not true. And you will just go back a few moments, actually. As I said, every time a vehicle's got one wheel at the top, one wheel at the bottom, you are 5.3% minimum. And so that's already greater than our desirables. What I am saying, though, is think about vehicle stability. And if in doubt, you can undertake stability simulations. There's a few other key takeaways which I just want to bring up, though, which is don't be scared of vehicle stability, but be very aware of it. And particularly it's these tail ends here. You can read through this in your own time potentially, but it's be careful if there's already overturning risks at your site, because this could be a real major issue. And it might be, there are ways to resolve it. And you might end up realizing that raising the entire intersection is safer than allowing the potential risk here. Threshold crossings are also a higher risk location, so consider them. And for the occasional truck turning, I wouldn't consider this a typical residential minor road. Wouldn't consider it a major issue. For the truck depot example, this is a key consideration. Okay, so let's have a little look through existing road and roadside features, guys. Let's use this as an example. I won't pose it to you. I'll just say I've got some paths here. I've got an intersection and a main through road. I've got a driveway, and I've got the path here. And is this a good location? Because I've just been told I need to design a wombat crossing here. And when I go and do it, I pop in my wombat crossing and I go, oh man, okay, so this is looking good, but I've got a clash with my driveway here. And I've also got a clash with the intersection itself. In fact, this is now almost operating within the intersection. And so you look at this and say, okay, so I want to resolve this intersection issue. It's a major issue for, hypothetically, it's a major issue for our project, particularly if it's blocking some turning movements or close to. And so I try and move it to the left, so to the right, and well, it's still in the driveway, and driveways can't easily be relocated. I mean, there's a lot of regulations and fences might need to be changed, etc. And to solve the driveway issue, well, I can't move this to the left very far. And you might start finding yourself strategically thinking, oh, God, I wish strategically we had our crossing over on the other side of the road. So validation at the early stages might allow that to be an acceptable outcome. I'm not saying you can always just chuck it on the other side of the road, because that might not work strategically. But don't consider, what's the right word, like compromises as the only out. You might be able to get an uncompromised solution that's still acceptable for your project. Another example here, guys, and I've got exactly the same scenario here, but I've added some parking bays and I've chucked in a bus bay. And I'm sitting here and I say, okay, I hope that I can avoid the intersection issue and hope I can avoid impacting this bus bay. And I design it up and I say, yes, I've done it. So I'm really happy. Bus bay's just squeezing in and the intersection's still squeezing in. Can I get a thumbs up or a scary face in this one, guys?
Okay, so pop in the thumbs up if you like the look of that. If you're a bit concerned by it for one reason or another, a scary face or the like. Just covering off a few things that have popped in. The turning tipping requirement for possibly furthering the argument for setting the crossing a little further back down a threshold to try and straighten things up. Yeah, again, it's that real balance between taking pedestrians too far off Edit's Island and they won't use it versus getting all of these things right, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good comment to make. I think you'll also, so you may be a designer who's well aware of what I'm about to mention, but it can be frustrating to see how far down the road you need to go to avoid overturning issues in that scenario. And I'm not saying you always look at raising an intersection, but a raised intersection, even just using this slide as an example, means that, okay, there's an overturning concern here. Well, if we have this ramp here, and a ramp back here and a ramp there. It's not the best example, but it means that vehicles are always striking the ramp for straight tyres, and that is a good outcome. So raised intersections, if there's a major concern about overturning, are an excellent option to at least consider. Not necessarily the only solution, though. Now, there's lots of thumbs up and scary faces flying through there, and that's good to see. There's one thing here that's an issue for me, though. And thumbs up in that this operates well. Scary face, which some of you probably picked, is that, yes, we've stopped impacting the exact bus environment and the bus zone itself. The bus can't even get in there anymore. And so bus travelling along here can't actually make that manoeuvre to get into that bus bay. And it's, the rear end will be sticking out if it were. So you might think I stitched this up as a pretty quick example for illustrating a random point about engineering that you never see, but it's not true. This is very, very common. Bus stops are regularly near side roads for accessibility to their patrons, and so are crossing locations. And many projects, several I've designed, have had this exact issue to consider. You might actually find, just put up the wrong question there, you might actually find yourself changing the format of the bus, of the crossing, to allow for that bus movement. So in this example, this may not be the go-to solution for your project, but in this example, I've removed additional parking to allow a bus and the northern curb return extension to allow a bus to enter, hit this with straight wheels and enter the bus stop location. It's just a quick example there. Let's move along though into roadside features. So this is another key part of validating our site, as I said earlier, and we're not limited to our road surface itself. So here we've got our good example. So we've got 5% crossfall for our roadside nature strip and a shared use path. And this side we've got a 6-to-1, and the mysteries of what I'm about to show you have just been shown because I clicked ahead too quickly, but 6-to-1, the very common roadside batter slope used all throughout Australia. And it's really steep though for a mobility impaired user though. So if you wanted to put just a raised safety platform here and think to yourself, and then it's a little bit of path, well, that might not work when you realise 16.7% is way more than our previously discussed DDA maximum grades. So we might want to hit our maximum 7% grade. So let's use this as an example and say, okay, well, now we're regrading the roadside and we're lowering an existing footpath. Damn it. I didn't think we were doing that in this project, but I guess we have to. And so we grade in a new footpath at 7%, chuck in a retaining wall because batters are too steep to make it work. We say, okay, well, we've just added some cost here. Damn it. Okay. Well, at least we know about it. Or you don't like the retaining wall. That's a big cost item. So you might shift the path, towards the road slightly, continue the steep slopes in. And these are just random examples from the example I was giving you. But we've turned our lump of asphalt on the road surface solution for road safety into, oh, wait, we do need to do extra works here. And when I draft that up in CAD and I realise that, okay, so 7% here and we need to grade back, so we've got an extra 10 metres of footpath to construct here. And I hadn't really thought about it until I'm at this stage. It's a shame. And many of you might be thinking 10 metres of concrete footpath, it's nothing, don't worry about it. But many council engineers are starting to scratch their heads going, oh my God, that could be an issue. And when you do 10 metres on this side and 10 metres on the other, and you've got 5 sites and you've got 100 metres of footpath you haven't thought about, well, that is a big cost item, and council engineers are now nodding their head, unsure. So what we're doing here in validating the site is understanding how this what was hopefully a simple race safety platform project, how it's growing and getting our budget right for our project. Understanding how many of these we can roll out, and that's important too. So we're not just limited to those sort of things. There's various other things. I'll just run through roadside features and signs. They're not big cost items, sure, but some of them have specific locations, and just be aware that it might be affecting a sign that might be a bit tricky to relocate somewhere. So if I had a crossing at this location, for instance, these would need to be relocated. Then you've got these bollards on the other side, so they start costing a bit more. Okay, removing some bollards in their footings, gotcha. And actual roadside furniture that's furniture, that's good to see, but that might need to move. And here I've got some pits, etc. as well. Okay, so this crossing location has other cost implications. Then I got this slide, so that crossing location was there, and we might want to cross across here now. And that's good, but oh my God, we've got retaining walls to relocate now or to reform. And of course, roadside trees, which I'll touch on shortly. Because in that example, where I've got a path that we're reforming, we're digging it down a bit lower, well, there's a tree here, and I'm happy because I've missed it. I'm a couple of, maybe a metre and a half away from this tree, and I'm really happy, and I'm bragging to everyone in the office about it until they explain that trees aren't poles with leaves on them, they've got roots, and those roots need to function and catch water and hold the tree up, and that is structural root zones and tree protection zones. And so this crossing location that dug a footpath in actually involves tree removal or high impact considerations for this tree. So please don't forget that our roadside has additional implications for our project. So I'm just going to jump into my favourite thing here, Ken. I'm not going into too much detail, but services. And I sometimes feel like this one about getting electrocuted by various services above. But I'm just going to chat through services because when you're out there validating your site, please be aware of them, but also you'll find out, but Dial Before You Dig, latest friend Before You Dig Australia, is a very good, important initial tool. So here's a site. This is a very real site. I didn't draft this up. This is exactly the sort of job that I do regularly. It's part of my passion for services. We've got things like, this has got it all. This is very true. Gas services, we've got electrical, we've got sewer, and don't assume sewers are always low. In the past I have. This particular site, this was what's called a pressure sewer. It was 600 mil deep. It was a problem for this project in terms of clashes. We've got water service. We've got Telstra. That's great. We've got the ball, and I think we're done. Well, no, we've also got roadside pits, of course, and poles. But services are just sometimes just so nightmarish, and they will eventually, if you've never had a problem with them in your projects, they will eventually come and get you, I'm sure of it. So cost issues are a big major part of that. They have impact mitigation costs, so we might actually have to encase a gas service in concrete just to avoid impact to it. We've got, of course, relocation costs, and they can be astronomical. They can really outweigh the budget of the project, and we need to be aware of services as early as possible so that we can start to understand the cost implications. And of course, there's additional design treatment, so we might actually relocate a curb specifically to avoid impact to a service, even though it may not have otherwise been required. And of course, it's not just cost issues, because there's timing issues, and we want to roll out our projects this Christmas, right? And well, before, and we've got objectives timing-wise and commitments timing-wise, and services can really, really be a bugbear for that. Service-proving turnarounds can be complex. They're fine, they're manageable, but it's a high-demand industry. It really is, and just assuming you can get it out next week, it may not occur when you find out there's a 3-month waiting list for the most affordable one, and the non-affordable one comes back to our cost issues. It might be significantly cost ineffective to get service proven quickly. We've also got service authority approvals and things like that. So with or without impacts, approvals may take time, 30, 90 days, these sort of things. And relocation of services can sometimes be, again, in that astronomical level of 12-month lead times for significant demand industries. So what that all means is that this turns a site like this, my dream job with no services anywhere, into this site very quickly. But these are all very randomly placed, and that's what we need to understand is where are the services. And I strongly suggest that my take is that it's a must for even 2D planning projects for you to understand roughly what services are there. So that's in Australia, at least. I'm not sure where it is in New Zealand. Sincere apologies to our New Zealand audience. But Before You Dig Australia is the go-to for approximate locations. This is not exactly where they are. This says roughly a service here on this side, or maybe it's on the other, we're not sure. But it tells you the services in the area of your project. And that means that we get a rough idea for what might be there. And then when you're doing your design, I strongly suggest that you prove all services within the area of works, just so that you know that you're not going to hit them, or you might even find out that you are and that you need to relocate. So that's just when you understand those extra implications. Just moving quickly towards the end here, Cam, but I've just got one last little thought. I just wouldn't mind a thumbs up, thumbs down. What have we got? We've got 5 minutes left, don't we? Till Marissa jumps in.
Yeah, bit.
Let's get a lot of involvement. No thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's just jump in and say, very quickly, guys, I want to put in a crossing at this location and a crossing at that location. I've got my 6-metre setback. Well, what sort of service issues am I looking at here? What do we not like just in the chat box, if you could say one-word answers for Ken's ease of assistance. Are there any concerns here?
Okay, it's before you dig in New Zealand, by the way.
Of course. Thank you.
Overhead cables, the stay wire cable stay, power poles,
Legendary, guys.
path connection. Are they gas markers, overhead clearance?
Oh, you guys are all massive winners. That is good. You've picked so many, and the gas marks are a really good one to pick up as well, and they are. So that's great. And the key points that I haven't been able to trick someone on this one ever again. Maybe it's less tricky than I thought, but this stay wire was one of the things I wanted to illustrate, which is power poles aren't limited to the pole. Be aware they're stay wires. It's not just a random example. These things do occur on your sites. And that stay wire, for example, is 1.5 meters from the edge of the path here. That's not enough clearance for the path user. Excellent work on the gas one though. Like, that's a really good pickup. So, okay, I'm not using this as a random example just to say, aha, look, stay wires, watch out, and they never occur. They are quite common, particularly at street corners, etc. And they do occur on your path projects and your race safety platform projects too. So this is a great example of a location where I'd be very careful about understanding that clearance requirement, because this is a shared priority crossing with cyclists. That has a very nasty incident potential if you didn't get that clearance right for a cyclist using it. And I won't leave you with that again. I like to make sure we all understand what these clearance requirements are. I'll just jump in and tell them to you. So look, Australian standards basically says for a pedestrian user, we've got 1.5 meter width. We don't need anything extra beyond that. That's enough. And we want 2.5 meters height clearance to an obstruction. So going back just to this, for a pedestrian user, we want 2.5 meters here. That's good to know. For cyclists, I wonder what that could be, and I will tell you, because it's in Austroads for at least the majority of my projects is what I refer to, and we have an additional horizontal clearance. So that's good. Desirably, it's 1 meter, 0.5 absolute minimum. In that example previously, I'd say the risk of someone getting caught on that wire is a pretty serious incident, and I'd be saying you want 1 meter. But then height-wise, we're then looking at 2.2 meters plus 0.3, again, equals 2.5 meters. So it's exactly the same for our cyclists and our pedestrian users, is those height clearances. If you've got any power pole stays, but also other vertical obstructions near your crossing locations, please consider these sort of clearance requirements for your project. And with a bunch of dancing wombats, that takes us to the end of module 1 and day 1. So been a real pleasure presenting to you today. I'm looking forward to presenting in a couple of days as well, module 2. Ken, shall we pass over to Marissa for our discussions, or is there any time for any burning questions people may have?
Yeah, I might just cover off a couple of things that have come in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So one that we can have a look at in the infrastructure design manual, there's somebody saying that it's a 0.25 minimum grade for curb. We had 0.33 in.
That's a good pickup, and I'm very familiar with the IDM, and it is, and it's also under the disclaimer of over limited lengths and things like that, because it can start to pond up a little bit to 0.25. But certainly when I refer to values in our course today and on day 2, they're relevant, but please use your own jurisdictional guidance for your own judgment in applying standards. And it's the principles that I'm discussing that you should take home with you, and potentially some of the values too, though.
Yeah, okay. Another one was, what are your thoughts on yellow hatching around stay wires on footpaths, or cable stay wires on footpaths?
Not too sure or familiar with it, but for just visual awareness at ground level, is it hatching? Or do you mean the sleeve cover?
Yeah, I'm not. No, just for visual awareness of it.
I think improvements to visual awareness would be great. If it's on the stay wire, I'd suggest that you need to be making sure that you're just chatting with the authority and it's within approval. It may need approvals for even touching a stay wire. including putting sleeve on it. If it's at ground level, it might be a good outcome as long as it's not conflicting with any other pavement marking guidance.
Yeah. Okay. A question that did come in earlier on was around this yellow pavement marking on the top. So just for context on that, that is in Australian Standard 1742 Part 10, and it's the draft version, which is about to be finalised. I will put that into the resources in the learning management system so people can see that. If you're in Victoria, it's certainly also well documented in the raised intersection design note as well as a few other documents. So I'll put them into the resource folder just so people have got that, which is probably a good point for now Marissa to jump on and show us where this resource folder is.
Oh, okay. I will share my screen with you. Let's get the right screen up. Okay, we can see the LMS.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. Hopefully you will have a chance to log into our LMS by now. If you haven't, please jump onto that just to make sure you've got no issues. You do need to complete a few tasks in order to complete the course, and those tasks are in the LMS. But here is the LMS. We've got some items in the welcome area. We've got a group forum that you're welcome to pop in and chat with your fellow participants, or you're welcome to, write in something to Ken or Jonathan. In the pre-course content module, we have a link to the How module from the Race Crossing Principles course, which I've sent out to you all. That is where the link is. So you can just click on that one to watch that video. Here are the resources that Ken is referring to. We already have a bunch of resources there that you're welcome to browse. We've got some more resources into this Off-Roads Guides to Road Design folder. And the additional ones, Ken, will pop into this area. So you can refer back to this. We'll pop them in after the webinar finishes. Module 1 for today. Here is the Module 1 presentation. This is the slides of all of the content that Jonathan has presented today. So you're welcome to refer back to that for your own notes. And we have a quiz, just a multiple choice, quick 10-question or so quiz. So if you just click on that one there, I've already started, but it will say start your attempt. And it'll just take you through 10 multiple choice questions for you to complete. And you will need to get an 80% pass mark. So it's about 8 questions correct on that one, but I don't think it's too difficult. I'm sure you're all pros by now. But that's the only task for today. So hopefully you have had a chance to jump onto LMS and have a browse. If you have any questions, please either pop them in the chat. We've got a couple minutes remaining, or you're welcome to email me.
Okay, thank you for that. We will shortly have the draft version of the updated 1742 Part 10, which specifies the colours, the layout, all sorts of bits and pieces around different raised crossings, where you would use the zebra markings, where you would use that. Of course, jurisdictionally, there are supplements to these sorts of things, which may slightly vary them. And as Jonathan rightly said there, we're talking here the principles of raised crossings, especially around the civil design aspects of it and the like. And of course, jurisdictionally, there will be slight tweaks. And especially New Zealand has some differences, especially around signs and lines and the like. And there was another question, final one from Chris, that came in around different paint markings on raised crossings, changing the shape of the piano key markings on ramps and those sort of things. There's a pretty standard layout, especially if you're in Australia, to use the 1742 layout, which is what you can see in all of our backgrounds, just as Andrew beautifully designed out. And you get yourself into a little bit of possible hot water if you vary from that. I know it's very tempting, especially with sort of the landscape architects and others who want to be trying to create newfangled, interesting designs. we have a reason that we sort of stick to that very standard layout, so it is recognisable across all raised crossings across Australia, and New Zealand uses the exact same sort of shark teeth style instead of piano keys, and then the zebra crossing. So yeah, strongly recommend you stick to the standard on those markings.
I'd agree. I'd support that as well in full. I mean, that consistency that guides the conscious awareness, but also the subconscious awareness when you're approaching these things that a motorist knows to expect to slow down. They're not wondering what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's just ticked us onto time. So thank you so much. We do have time within the next module for more questions. Of course, you can email them through at any point. Log in a little bit early. Marissa might ask you a trivia question, give out some prizes before we even start the next session on Thursday. But thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Marissa. Thank you all for the wonderful questions. And we shall see you at the next module.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks everyone. Okay.
Bye.
See you in a couple of days. Bye.
Bye.